Okay, before I start talking about this episode, I would like to add some context since this is the second episode of the Dark Period. Being the first of 3 episodes to be rushed out the door following Kirby vs. Majin Buu, this episode arguably had the biggest impact on the team. The episode's writer, Nervous Nick, had this episode thrusted onto him because they were all like, oh, he's the fighting game guy, and these are fighting game characters. How bad could this possibly be? Well, this bickering led to more than frustrations with understanding the entire lore of BlazBlue and Guilty Gear, but let's not act like I have nothing to address. Going to my video on Death Battle remasters, I'd like to show this clip.
And I mean ever get touched again. Keep Nervous Nick as far away from the matchup as possible. Hell, just kick him out of the building if you have to.
I hope I don't need to explain why you should never do this. And since I brought that video up, I'd also like to mention a few things that I said in response to a comment that I pinned. No, Ragna was not the only character teased for the matchup. I definitely remember a next time on Death Battle where only Ragna was revealed, but I can't find the actual teaser anywhere. On top of that, they actually do show the dragon install. I mean, it's vague, but that's because of sprite limitations. And honestly, the dragon install that I was referring to was Soul's True Gear form. And another thing about this episode's production is that the episode had to be re-uploaded 3 months after its release because it featured fan art that went uncredited. Yeah, not the best lifetime an episode has had. Though I do stand that the way Nick wrote some of the content was very unprofessional, but remember that this was well before Death Battle had the research team they have today. This is why, unlike other BlazBlue fans, I'm more than willing to give Death Battle a second chance with the series. They have researchers that are more than able to give the series a new light and interpret some of its higher-end feats, as well as address the notorious multiversal BlazBlue arguments. I mean, if f***ing Darkstalkers is able to get a second look in modern Death Battle, I fail to see why BlazBlue shouldn't. Besides, Nick has said, and I roughly paraphrase, BlazBlue is not hard to follow. It was just a lot to take in as an outsider. He said this at the same event that Raiden vs. Excalibur was revealed, and where James Bond vs. John Wick was unofficially revealed. The event was never streamed, so you'll just have to take my word for it, and I'm not trying to say that another BlazBlue episode is guaranteed to happen at some point, though it is somewhere on the table. Maybe they wouldn't be ready for a Ragna episode specifically, or even an episode featuring Jin, Noel, or Terumi, but they could make the next BlazBlue episode either Bang vs. Chip or Potemkin vs. Tager. These episodes aren't very thematic, but not only are these matchups fairly popular, most of the characters involved don't require extensive knowledge of the series' terminologies, so they'd be a nice window to look into how they would approach the BlazBlue world again from a versus standpoint. And if this window somehow manages to reflect the light of a rare blue moon, and that light somehow manages to compel Nick to find this video and go through with watching it, in case I haven't made it clear enough, I hold no ill will towards you or anyone else that worked on this episode, nor anyone involved with this dark period, or any of Death Battle's other low points. I'm doing the best amount of research I can for this series' production history, but at the end of the day, I don't know the full story of any episode's production, let alone Ragna vs. Soul, where there's almost nothing public. I would also like to mention that my script for this episode is very different. I like to show the scripts of my videos on Patreon, which you don't know that because for some reason you're not one of my patrons, are you? This script is styled in the same way as the videos on my second channel, where I have a bunch of bullet points of stuff I think I need to say or reference, and then I ad-lib from there. This episode is the one exception. Even with Goku vs. Superman, I scripted the fight animation, but I didn't script the analyses because I didn't think I needed to. Whereas here, I'm scripting and analyzing every fundamental level of this episode as I wanted to write down everything as respectfully as I can. As much as I want to act professional, I'm not gonna sugarcoat a damn thing about this episode. So let's just tear into it, why don't we? So to start off, I think that Wiz's delivery of
Ragna the Bloodhead
is a little weird, but what can you do? He tried to sound cool. But going into Ragna's analysis, they start by talking about the Black Beast and how it took the 6 heroes to take it down, and then they start talking about Ragna. Of course, you have Boomstick saying his edgelord appearance says he has tragic backstory written all over it, but I do like how Wiz calls his backstory gruesome. Anyways, that's all the positives I have to say about Ragna's analysis, so let's just get into the negatives. A general theme of Ragna's analysis is the no one knows running gag, and over the course of this review, I'm going to explain to you why this phrase is not only very insulting to BlazBlue fans, but also fails as a functional joke. The first time they say no one knows actually isn't too bad. The way that Wiz delivers it makes it come across as some sort of mystery. Of course, they never capitalize on it at any other point in the analysis, but it's the least bad. That being said, the context of it is what the experiments were for, which have multiple explanations in the story. They were trying to find a vessel for Yuki Terumi. They were conducting prime field experiments, which is literally experiments on artificial humans, like Ragna. And with Ragna in particular, they noticed that he had traces of the Black Beast within him. And given how the Black Beast is a pretty important part of BlazBlue's lore, I think that Relius and Terumi would be compelled to extensively look into that. The next bit is them saying,
Ragna's sister Saya grew very sick.
With what?
Sickness? No one knows.
"You, scientist with an English major, can you read?" If the answer is no, then I'd like to point out that it is confirmed that Saya was born with a frail body, and everyone knows that frail bodies become more susceptible to illnesses. Then they start to talk about Jin's relationship with Ragna and Saya, and then they use it as a segue to Terumi's role in his backstory.
So then a maniacal hipster villain named Yuki Terumi showed up out of nowhere, helped Jin impale Ragna through the chest, and then cut off his arm for good measure.
Then Wiz, by himself, with nobody asking or leading into it, says,
Why? How? No one knows.
okay, to start off, while Jin was jealous of—
Have you familiarized yourself with that phrase yet? Good, because it's not stopping anytime soon.
Well, at least he's being honest about not liking BlazBlue very much. Okay, to start off, while Jin was jealous of Ragna's relationship with Saya, that's not why he killed him. There were two other factors at play here. The Nox Nictoris Yukianasa's power of order, it's really not that difficult to say, and Terumi himself. They both convinced Jin to kill Ragna because he was the Black Beast, and they said that Jin was destined to kill him because he was supposed to be the hero. But instead, they ignore all of that and paint Jin as a moron who just randomly tried to kill the only people in his life when that's not at all what's happening. And as for Terumi, it's actually not a big deal at all since he's painted as a cruel, twisted man who's evil for the sake of it, but he needed to rely on Jin to destroy a magic barrier surrounding the church so that he could use Jin's memories and Saya's body for his own research. The next bit is a tiny bit better, where Boomstick points out how Rachel just revives Ragna, gives him a new arm, and leaves. I mean, the phrase, "don't think, just accept," is annoying given Wiz was being passive-aggressive earlier, but it's not that bad. I would have just changed it to Boomstick's delivery of
What the fuck?
in Eggman vs. Wily. Wiz then skips the part where Jubei helps him to learn about the Azure Grimoire and talks about both it and the concept of Seether, which they tried to claim that it's different from magic, despite the fact that Seether is literally called magic element in Japan. It was just localized as Seether. So, yes, it is magic. They do come back to Jubei training Ragna, because good pacing isn't as vital as mocking a series, am I right? I say this because Wiz randomly says, again, by himself, with nobody leading into it,
Where the hell was he before? No one knows.
Jubei is one of the 6 heroes. He has all sorts of missions and affairs, searching for some of the NOL's cauldrons, keeping an eye on Terumi, interfering with Relius's research, assisting the other 6 heroes with their affairs. And on top of that, they say it like Jubei was being irresponsible, but he did leave Ragna, Jin, and Saya in the care of his sister-in-law Celica Mercury, because he wanted them to be away from Relius and especially Terumi. Though I will commend Boomstick for trying his best to give Wiz an explanation.
Probably destroying someone's furniture or pissing in their shoes.
You know, this joke would be at least a little bit funny if it wasn't the only joke that Boomstick ever makes about cats. I mean, he made this joke a few times in Felicia vs. Tao Kaka, and I wouldn't say it was peak comedy there. At least they point out that Jubei was the one who gave Ragna his red jacket and his sword.
Called Blood Scythe.
It's actually called Aramasa, but I can tell you're not interested in doing a 5-second Google search, so okay.
And before you point out that it's clearly a sword, not a scythe, it can do this.
Doesn't change the fact that it's still a sword, but 5-second Google searches don't interest Boomstick either, so okay. And then they talk about how Ragna became known as the Grim Reaper and bring up his bounty.
90 billion, whatever their currency is. No one knows.
Guys, it's really not that difficult. Also, I'd like to point out that in the games, they show this poster with the currency's name and symbol, so it's bizarre that they bring this up as a weird moment at all. Hell, you the player can literally earn this currency in the games and spend them on things like alternate colors and artwork. Did you just not play the games while researching them? It certainly wouldn't help Wiz and Boomstick with the ending of Ragna's analysis.
In fact, Ragna was the original Black Beast, sent back in time after falling into a magic cauldron. The two were somehow separated and did battle in the past. These events would repeat themselves in a 100-year time loop until this chick saved Ragna from falling into that cauldron, stopping the Black Beast from appearing in the past in the first place.
But if the Black Beast never went back in time, then it would never have created Seether, and everything in BlazBlue shouldn't exist as we know it. So how—
No one knows!
Okay, there is a lot to unpack here. is what I would say if the series didn't answer their exact question within 2 words: multiverse theory. Of course, this doesn't change the fact that a lot of what they said is wrong, but even if they were right, the simple concept of multiverse theory would still debunk this whole no one knows bit. Multiverse theory has been a key part of BlazBlue's story ever since the first game. There are a bunch of moments you could use as examples, but really, the existence of Hakumen is all you need. It shouldn't be too much to understand this question with, maybe it works like how Hakumen works. Also, side note, I don't appreciate Noelle being referred to as this chick. I know that she isn't the most beloved character in BlazBlue, but not only do I like her a lot, but when you remember how she's the main heroine of the game and how imperative she is to Ragna's story as a whole, a name drop would have been nice. However, unlike Wiz and Boomstick, I don't think you're that stupid. I think you're smart enough to pick up on the pattern that I'm pointing out. One reason why no one knows fails as a functional joke is that none of this stuff matters. The first bit is kind of understandable, but it's still not entirely relevant information aside from the Black Beast somehow being inside of Ragna. The second bit you can answer with the manga panels that they're literally showing on screen. The third bit is just a hot mess. It deliberately overlooks context because Wiz is much more interested in letting you know that he does not like this series at all. The fourth bit is a similar case that's also ignoring the fact that the disappearing mentor figure is a very common trope that no one in the history of ever has considered to be a legitimate flaw of any story. Hell, I know for a fact that they praised Trunk for his debut despite his entire existence basically being an asshole, but it's bad when BlazBlue does it despite having multiple explanations for it in the story. Okay, the fifth bit is just pathetic and a waste of time to go over, and the sixth bit, while sounding like they're pointing out a plot hole one time, can be easily explained with 2 words. Now don't get me wrong, BlazBlue's story gets crazy convoluted, and even very, very weird. Remember Noelle, the character that Wiz and Boomstick struggled to remember the name of? What if I told you that canonically, contrary to her physical appearance, she's 5 years old? This is because she is a clone of Ragna's sister. One of 3 actually, and her Murakuma form barely hides her— Nope, I am not showing that on screen! All you need to know is that in some shots, they just straight up forget to cover it at points, and it's f***ing gross. Or how about Hakumen? He's actually Jin from another timeline, and he doesn't have access to his full power because the gods of the world cannot decide on whether or not they want to acknowledge his existence. Or how about the fact that Yuki Terumi and Hazuma are both Terumi, but they're forced to be separate entities despite sharing the same body, but they have to be different people. And so is the character that Hazuma is cloned of. Yeah, Hazuma is also a clone, but not a clone of Terumi, despite the fact that he's still supposed to be the same body as Terumi. Oh, but here's one of my all-time favorites. You know Blood Edge? No, not Ragna. The guy who Ragna titled himself after and was Jubei's close friend and master? Well, apparently, this Blood Edge guy is actually Ragna himself. Oh, and as far as I know, it's never specified as to whether or not Ragna is a clone of this Blood Edge person. So as far as the game's concerned, Ragna and Jubei just casually forget each other. It's just something that happens. Okay, let's calm down here. I'm getting a little too sarcastic myself, but either way, Wiz and Boomstick could have talked about any of this, but they don't. Instead, they just take some incredibly minute plot points and amp them up as if they were actual criticisms. This is the same idiotic criticism as a modern CinemaSins video or Nostalgia Critic review. And the funny thing is, Death Battle's not supposed to be like this. They're meant to run down a character's backstory, feats, weapons, armor, and skills without bringing their personal bias and opinions into it. Look, it's fine to poke fun at the occasional weird thing or go, "We don't talk about this bad thing from the franchise!" But that doesn't apply when you vent out your personal frustrations by making fun of everything about the character and the series he comes from. And this no one knows bit perfectly explains why. It's a bad look on the script no matter how you slice it. The best case scenario is that Nick just wrote a bad running gag. Sometimes it happens. But some of the worst cases? Well, one of the worst case scenarios is that Nick's being unprofessional and venting his frustrations into the script. Novice writers get rightfully slammed for venting their petty feelings all the time in a fictional story. But the real worst case scenario is that this no one knows bit is alienating people for liking a video game character, and I shouldn't have to explain why that's awful. And this isn't even the only time it appears. But before we get into that, let's go over Soul's analysis. Or more accurately, let's talk about the one thing that everyone remembers from this section, if not the entire episode. The That Man joke is really funny. Unironically, one of the best jokes of the entire show. Even with my experience revisiting this episode being negative overall, I still laughed out loud at this bit. The Who's on First style of comedy is brilliantly executed with the way that Boomstick is able to escalate Wiz's anger with his questions, combined with Wiz trying to explain explain it in a way that he'll understand, only for Boomstick to find a loophole in time. Top it off with Ben and Chad's bombastic voice acting, make it feel like they're genuinely frustrated with one another. Granted, that man has a canon name now, but not only was that long after this episode was released, but given how Wiz was mentally incapable of doing any research on BlazBlue one time, a joke like this makes a nicely constructed home out of the episode no matter when you watch it. And thankfully, this is not the only good joke in the episode. I also like the blue robo-penis joke. It's in line with the crazy anime shenanigans that I wish were included in Ragna's analysis more often. Heck, even Boomstick's delivery of
But is he guilty?
was honestly really charming. Especially when Wiz instantly plays off of it by talking more about Soul's backstory and how he was responsible for his girlfriend's death. That's good stuff right there. But aside from that, Soul's analysis is just fine. They cover his character fine, they explain his abilities and weapons fine, and the other jokes are not funny, but they're fine. When the episode came out, I wasn't familiar with Guilty Gear at all, so I just assumed that Soul was just another character with a big sword. But now that I've played a lot of the Guilty Gear games, studied up on the lore, and have grown a massive respect to the point where it's my second favorite fighting game series behind BlazBlue itself, there's a lot missing here. Aside from Justice and that man, they don't mention any of the other characters in the series, nor do they go over his relationship with other characters. With one example being, Kai Kisk. They mention Jin without any issue. They couldn't have at least name-dropped Kai to make the matchup have any intriguing comparisons, like almost every other matchup they've done up to this point. This is the debut of a new series in Season 2, where it stars the main character, who the story is based around, and it barely gets more coverage than Dig Dug. Plus the end clip is kinda terrible as it's not even an end clip. Soul Badguy's literally just though there is one moment that sticks out and also brings down the analysis for me.
He went back in time and witnessed his past self get murdered, which should have erased him from the present a la Marty McFly. But he didn't like that idea very much, so he just didn't.
After BlazBlue, nothing is too bizarre for me anymore.
Shut up, Chad! You're being a virgin! Sorry. I just couldn't resist screaming that out loud. I thought it'd be really funny. Another reason why No One Knows fails as a functional joke is because this thing from Soul Badguy's analysis is weirder than everything they've brought up in BlazBlue combined. To be fair, this could have been an ironic moment like, hey, the weirdest thing we found doesn't bother me. And it would work if Wiz and Boomstick did literally anything other than mindlessly mock the BlazBlue series over trivial bullshit. We get it! You grew a hate boner for BlazBlue that you don't want to put away. That doesn't mean you have to show it to the audience every 3 minutes. And yes, I did say 3 minutes, as it does pop out one last time, but we'll get there later. For now, it's time to talk about the death battle. Death battle analyses tend to get overshadowed by the fight itself, understandably so, and with that in mind, I can see what people like about it. The animation is fast and fluid, and the combos are elaborate, it's synced up to good music. I also think that the setup is perfect. Soul's a bounty hunter, and is perfectly in character for Ragna to just be wandering about despite his large bounty, which they also bring up in Ragna's analysis just so it doesn't look weird to outsiders. That being said, I would have liked to get a fully fledged ArcSys-styled intro, but at least we get like half of one. They also use recycled voice clips from their fighting games, and unlike with Ryu vs. Scorpion, they don't mash that well. They use Ragna's English voice and Soul's Japanese voice, especially since they have very different audio qualities.
Who are you? Out of my way, you're dead.
But you know what? Implementing Patrick Seitz' Ragna is always morally correct, so I'll ignore it. It starts with the remix of Blood Pain playing in the background, and I think it's a great track to start off with. It matches the tone of the fight and is even kind of fitting given that their appearances are kind of similar. Both characters are looking for a hit, Soul wins the struggle and lands a decent looking loop combo that causes Ragna to instantly activate the Azure Grimoire? Okay, I get what they were going with this. One of Ragna's weaknesses is that he's over-reliant on the Azure, but that's only when he's getting completely bodied, not after taking like one combo. This causes him to get hit by what is apparently Soul's bandit revolver. I only knew this because it plays the voice clip from off-screen, where you can barely hear it over Ragna's dialogue, though I do like how Ragna uses Dead Spike to pin Soul and— Whoa! Okay, that is a terrible use of masking. You can see bits of the background everywhere, and they didn't even try to play around with the colors or even add a drop shadow to make it look less jarring. Still, Ragna activates the blue and charges at Soul in a damage sprite? Okay then. Well, at least the Ragnacopter combo is pretty cool. Then he activates the Idea Engine and, okay, that is definitely not how the Idea Engine works. In the analysis, they said that it works like a barrier, but at no point has it been a separate attack. After that, Soul activates his dragon install with a muffled voice clip and a limp little doink, and then Ragna activates Blood King. Okay, that is definitely not how that works. The entire point of the idea engine was to help Ragna control the blue without most of the drawbacks. This is basically the equivalent of Goku going Super Saiyan 4 against Superman, saying it's his strongest form, getting one punch, and then downgrading to Super Saiyan 2 after like 5 seconds. To be fair, I do like how Ride the Fire plays during this section, and we get some good back and forth combos followed by a great moment where Ragna impales Soul, taunts him, and then gets stabbed by Soul. It's a raw moment that shows that while Soul didn't just no-sell Ragna's attack, he was still able to survive it, and he used his remaining energy to get one surprise attack that actually affects him. No complaints here. Same can't be said for the ending, even ignoring how Ragna can't just become the Black Beast via overusing the Azure Grimoire. It makes more sense than Ragna becoming the Black Beast after taking some damage from Soul. They don't say this at any point in the analysis, so like, why was it framed like this? Actually, I think a bigger question is, why is Howling Moon playing here? That's Valkenheim's theme, guys. Is it because it has a full moon there? Well, that's really stupid. This shot does look pretty alright though. But what's not alright is Soul turning into his true gear form, which is suddenly in silhouettes now, much like the Black Beast, though I did mention how the true gear form has no sprites, and making their own custom sprites just wasn't an option. Time restrictions are big ol' wankers, I tell you what. But Soul does this weak projectile attack that one-shots the Black Beast despite not actually hitting him, and it somehow destroys most of the area, and Soul is back in his base form. Whatever. Decent fight, but it really shit the bed in the ending. And no, I'm not talking about the kill, I'm talking about the outro clip. This outro clip exclusively focuses on Soul jumping down the pillar, finding a stack of paper titled BlazBlue Story Script, and destroys it. You know what? Hot take of the night, this is worse than the Volume 3 advertisement that falls down at the end of Yang vs. Tifa. Now don't mistake me as defending it, as I also have some very unkind words for that little blunder, but let's go over what this outro clip means in the grand scheme of things. You have Wiz and Boomstick doing nothing but shitting all over Ragna and BlazBlue as a whole throughout Ragna's entire analysis, not being subtle about how he doesn't want to talk about or say anything good about the series one time. You have some backhanded comments about some of the other characters in the series as well. Then you have them taking yet another stab at BlazBlue in his opponent's analysis. You have Ragna being misrepresented in the fight's choreography. And finally, without even showing his weapon, you have one last jab at the literal entirety of BlazBlue. To me, this episode feels like a hate piece, with Soul being used as a vessel to reinforce that hate. Ragna losing has nothing to do with it. He didn't stand a chance against Soul, and even now with all the new feats for both series, he still doesn't. It's just that the way he goes out and the lack of appearance in the outro clip is really uncouth. I've been admittedly a little infamous about how open I've been about how out of all the combatants that have been on Death Battle, Ragna has had worse treatment than every fictional character not named Michelangelo. At least with Shadow, they covered his story well and didn't say that being a quote-unquote edgelord was a bad thing. At least with Bowser, he was characterized mostly very well and had a decent analysis. At least with Starscream, they let him have a single moment of using his uniqueness as a character that was used for his advantage. At least with Tifa, they made her look cool in the fight with some well-implemented references. At least with Luigi, they said he could turn his weaknesses into strengths and demonstrated that in the fight. At least with Aang and Edward Elric, the respect threads that replaced their analysis sections were respect threads. At least with Mega Man Volnut, you had Wiz showing some respect to him, despite literally creating an entire meme of pretty much every Battle Royale matchup in existence. And yes, at least with Superman, they tried to hide their bias. And failed, but they tried. And also, this is implying that the likes of Superman and Shadow were never in a good episode that treated them better. You can't say any of that about Ragna. They couldn't go 5 seconds in his analysis without nitpicking the story. His characterization in the fight had some issues. The only unique character bit he was allowed to have was a poorly masked bit from a cutscene from Calamity Trigger. Wiz was showing less respect to Ragna than even Boomstick, who expressed his arbitrary beef with edgelords in this episode, and neither of them even trying to hide that they didn't want to be talking about Ragna or BlazBlue. How is nobody been talking about this? I guess you could argue that not everyone is familiar with BlazBlue, but on the one hand, I don't agree that it explains how people couldn't see any disrespect when everyone knows how dirty Starscream and Ed got done in their episodes, even with both of their series being niche or at least less popular than the more mainstream shows of their mediums. But on the other hand, I can understand why people don't cover the full extent of it, as most of the big name Death Battle content creators aren't familiar with either series. I can only count 2 big names who are. Digitai did call out how disingenuous they were being in Ragna's analysis, and Nemesis Bloodright gave them a slap on the wrist for the whole Platinum Dollars thing, but otherwise, he kinda just skimmed over how bad it got and gave the episode a decent score just because the episode had Soul Badguy in it. Ignoring the fact that Soul Badguy barely even gets to do half the cool stuff he's known to do, and the very few bits of cool stuff he does do is implemented with as bare minimum effort as possible, because I guess we're not allowed to have the winner looking cool either, apparently. Remember when I said that Soul's analysis was about as meaningful as Dig Dug's outside of a few good jokes? Well, they don't make him look that special in the fight either. For a character that they describe as lazy, he sure is giving it his all until the end. Yeah, the combos may look cool and all, and he obviously isn't nearly as misrepresented as Ragna was in this episode, but I feel like his choreography is kinda backwards. I mean, he goes in hard with some lightning fast combos and attacks, goes into Dragon Install with some shorter combos than in his base form, then he goes into his gear form where he shoots a limp fireball that doesn't even look like it hit anything. Not to mention that his attacks are based around extremely powerful strikes, yet his attacks feel kinda weak. Yeah, the animation is really good, but the sound design and animation don't give any combo finishers the sense of impact they need, and no amount of constant camera shakes will support that. And this leads us into the biggest problem with this whole animation. It's one thing to have a really bad analysis, but with some episodes you can do exactly that and still get a great fight animation out of it. But with Ragna vs. Soul, the fight's biggest issue is that it has no identity. I mean, really think about it. Up until the Black Beast scene, this whole animation is the type of white noise-flavored milky toast you'd see in the vast majority of Season 1's repertoire, or even the majority of Season 4's episode. Wait, who said that? Can you name any highlight that makes it stand out from the rest of the episodes in this season? Because having revisited all of its episodes, I think that Fulgor vs. Sector unironically has a more memorable fight animation than this. Sure, it's good animation, but can you name any moment that screams Ragna vs. Soul? Better yet, name another highlight you wouldn't be able to see in another episode. Personally, I'm a huge fan of both characters and the series they come from, but I can hardly tell you. Granted, the episode did have the necessary dynamic of the Azure Grimoire versus the Dragon Install, represented by Ragna's black long shadow and Soul Sprite's blinking red. This is fine because of the sprite limitations. While Soul does have a more elaborate design for it in Xrd, not only were those sprites a lot less accessible, but they would absolutely need to spend a long time working on custom sprites, which again was just not an option. But I'm glad that they were able to distinguish them at all. But there is one thing I should say. What if I told you that neither character uses a single one of their supers in the fight? I'm serious. There's no Ragna screaming, "Carnage Scissors!" And there's no Soul Badguy going, "Tyrant Rave!" at any point in the fight. And reminder, this is a fighting game themed episode where neither character uses a super, knowing that 7 episodes ago they had the loser using both of his finishers along with the winner using at least one of his supers, 2 if you count his No Mercy in the outro clip. And 3 episodes ago, we had a super as one of the most impactful attacks of the entire season. But if you want to be technical, Blood Cane and Dragon Install do qualify as supers, but they're literally meant to power up their special moves and even give them access to other moves or even supers that they can't access normally in their base forms. You could have done what Ryu vs. Scorpion did, where you had Ryu using his specials in base form, and then once he powers up into a stronger form, that's where the supers come out. But here, it oddly feels like the opposite. They barely even use their special moves. Oh, and side note, Ragna only uses 2 special moves in the entire fight, those being Dead Spike, which is used pretty creatively, even if he forgets to yell out its name for some reason, and Inferno Divider, which he does yell out, but you can barely hear it over the unnecessarily loud sound effects. Soul does have it a little better, but even then, he uses 2 Gun Flames, a Blink and You'll Miss It Volcanic Viper, a Banded Revolver that's off screen for some reason, and Wild Throw. And with exception of the Inferno Divider, they only use these moves in their base forms, and in their super forms, they almost exclusively use generic attacks. This adds a sort of weird reverse power creep to this whole episode. Is that what it's called? Is there like an actual term for it? Like, what would it even be? Like a weaken creep? That's probably not what it's called, but I'm gonna be using it anyway because I think it sounds funny. This fight has a weird sense of weekend creep that literally does not exist in any other episode. I mean, for Martel's sake, even the mistake somehow managed to have a convincing sense of power creep. On top of that, this episode also has no dust combos, no soul eater, no bursts, no blazblue signal when Ragna activates the Azure, which by the way, even Taukaka got to use in her episode, and that was during her astral heat, which this episode also doesn't have. No pretty visuals, and no Aramasa transforming into a scythe. Boomstick literally call it a scythe in the analysis? But let's be real. It's unfair and childish of me to expect everything I want in a matchup to be translated perfectly in an episode. Certainly for a season 2 episode that was a victim of time constraints. But if they weren't gonna use any of their supers, there is one thing that they definitely should have included at the very bare minimum. A Guilty Gear instant kill. For those who don't know, this is the series' take on a Mortal Kombat fatality. And yes, I am directly implying that this is the equivalent of a Mortal Kombat episode where the Mortal Kombat character wins, but there's no fatality to be seen. With all of this in mind, the episode feels less like a fight between Ragna and Soul and more like a fight between two generic functions with big swords. You could replace this whole episode with a Cloud vs. Guts DBX and nothing would change. Hell, Guts vs. Nightmare has the same exact beats as this episode. And on another note, why is this still the only Guilty Gear episode of the entire show? Hell, Guilty Gear hasn't even had a character in DBX or 1 Minute Melee. I mean, we've seen blazblue in both shows a few times. Where's my Guilty Gear love and Versus? And I guarantee I'm gonna get some comments from people who only ever watch mainstream IPs owned by Disney or Nickelodeon and say,
Well, you see here, Guilty Gear is a new series that Death Battle has no reason to bring back.
Because as we all know, Death Battle has never made episodes starring niche characters or series, nor has Guilty Gear ever had a new game that has sold millions of copies, been renowned as one of the most beloved modern fighting games in mainstream media from casuals and critics, reached trending status on social media platforms multiple times, sustained a strong player base with its even higher acclaimed DLC and rollback netcode, and maintained a huge cult following by the nature of the series with its ambitious storytelling. Yeah, I agree, that's completely unrealistic. Okay, you might think that I'm stretching as far as I can reach with how many gripes I brought up. And yeah, a lot of them are personal, and they definitely bother me more than they would bother the average Death Battle fan. At best, it's about as memorable as an old tree that I pass by when driving on the highway, and at worst, it's an episode that randomly feels like alienating me over liking a fictional character. So with that in mind, what else am I supposed to gain from this episode? I have no issue with saying that, aside from the mistake, this is my least favorite episode of the entire show. I'm aware that it is not the worst. There are a minimum of 6 other episodes outside of season 1 that I would consider worse on a technical level. 3 of those being in this very season, and one of those was already talked about. But I hate this episode more than any of them. It mocks me for liking a fictional character, condescends me for liking a video game series, upsets me when I hear the two hosts acting biased and unprofessional because logic, reasoning, and lack thereof, and above all, disappoints me that they don't even make the other character look cool at all, because they're more interested in using him as a tool to further dunk on the character they're already expressing constant distaste for. All of this for what? An animation that gets heavily outclassed by virtually every other good episode in the series? Be real! I would infinitely prefer an episode that feels like an advertisement meant to hype up a character I don't like, who's from a series I like even less, at the expense of a character I do like, rather than an episode that feels like a hate piece on one of my favorite series and one of my favorite characters that doesn't even try to make the winner looking cool either, despite also being one of my favorite series. Oh look! There's Tyrant Rave! With fire attack trails? Gee, glad to know that they were always on the table, but you consciously chose to reserve them as a means of gifting blazblue fans with an ugly bird. You too, I guess. Look, I got no beef with the people who worked on this episode. They clearly learned and improved from this misstep. But at the same time, if they're not gonna hide their bias in an episode that's not supposed to be filled with their own personal opinions, then I should not have to hide my bias when talking about your video in another video where my personal opinion is half the point. So I'm gonna let my bias fully determine the score and give Ragna vs. Soul a well-deserved 21 out of 100. The only factors that help it maintain a score above a 20 are the That Man joke and the fact that I get to hear Patrick Seitz as Ragna again, even if it's through recycled voice clips. But other than that, this episode and virtually everything to do with it. Ragna vs. Velvet when? Jeez, now I'm gonna get a bunch of comments calling me a child. Rightfully so, as just in case, I need to point this out. You don't have to share the exact opinions that I have on this episode. I don't expect anyone's opinion to change just because some nobody on the internet talked about it one time. I would like you to understand my opinion and where I'm coming from with it, but you don't have to parrot my exact words to everyone you see. Oh, and also, do not harass anyone who worked on this episode, or anyone who doesn't think that Ragna was done that dirty. I mean, look, I'm the one publicly crying about this episode on the internet, and I don't do that, so I fail to see why you should.